Hi, if you've been watching the series recurringly, you should know by now that I'm the current editor. My name is Mulundano Machia, and like I said in some of my previous appearances, I would be showing up regularly to try and demystify a few things with mental health, try and get some things clear. So for today, we're going to be talking about anxiety. Now, most people, when they think of anxiety, don't give it that much stock. They don't give it that much of how can I put this? They don't give it that much attention. Even though anxiety as a whole is not necessarily the easiest thing to deal with. Now, first off, let's get definitions out of the way. Anxiety is described as a prolonged fear or unease over a perceived or real future threat, as contrasted by fear, which is the unease over an imminent threat, something that's happening right in this instance or right at this moment. Now, the way most people respond to things when they go wrong is with a negative emotion. It's expected, and anxiety is a very normal thing. Now, to bring about the idea of neuroticism. Most people think that you're not supposed to be anxious, and most people think that any sign of overt anxiety means that you have a mental health problem. It's a really weird spectrum to sit on, where most people either think that you're not supposed to be, or you are, if you show too much of it or any of it, you're on the wrong side of the spectrum, when it's not really that clear cut. You see, neuroticism is part of a 5-point personality model made by modern psychologists to describe the human mind. This consists of openness, agreeability, extroversion, and conscientiousness alongside neuroticism. Neuroticism is just described as a higher tendency to feel negative emotions. It doesn't necessarily have the impairment that comes to do with disorders, for example, anxiety disorders, but it is the tendency to feel negative emotions more. Some people are more neurotic than others. It's a personality trait. Some people just experience higher negative emotions. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. A good deal of the people I know are slightly more neurotic than others, and it's usually perceived as a problem when in actuality it's just the makeup of their personality. Now, I say this because we need to distinguish and understand mental health and mental illnesses. There's two things that I've found which unsettle me. Either we are too quick to dismiss mental illnesses, or we're too quick to diagnose normal behaviors as mental illnesses. We're too quick to label people in a certain way just because, let's say, they are more neurotic than others. It's good to understand yourself, and it's good to understand your mental health, but it's also good to know exactly what is around and what is going on and the exact definition of all of these things, because you could end up mislabeling things or creating a misnomer for whoever or whatever you're talking about. So to make things clear, neuroticism is a personality trait. Some people are more neurotic than others. Some people experience more negative emotions than others, anxiety, aggression, and whatnot. Now, to make things clear, neuroticism is not in the flow of a disorder or anything along those lines, because it doesn't necessarily disrupt your normal daily life. It doesn't take away from the life that you're living. It's just that you have a higher tendency to experience negative emotions, which is quite okay. Quite fine. Some people are just more neurotic. It must also be stated that even though neuroticism isn't necessarily a problem, it can show signs that something may become a problem. I mean, if you're experiencing negative emotions more often, it means that it might be slightly harder to manage, and therefore you might end up building up to some of the disorders I'm going to talk about a little later from now. So just to make that clear. Now, neurosis is an actual disorder or term for a disorder, but psychologists don't use it because it's a bit vague and outdated. There's more specific terminology for it. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I want people to understand that there's nothing wrong with you if you tend to feel negatively about things more often. There's nothing necessarily wrong with you. There's nothing that's stating that you're broken or that something is bad. No, it's just a personality trait. You'll be able to function and work and live and move with life comfortably, even though you are slightly more neurotic. And neuroticism usually presents itself in some small things. For example, shyness, tendencies to be anxious, reluctancy in social situations, tendency to worry more. The fine line is that it doesn't disrupt your daily life. Now let's move on to anxiety. Let me get a bit technical here, but anxiety and fear are responses which are things which release a hormonal response that kicks in your fight or flight mechanism. It works with the adrenal gland in your brain to produce specific chemicals, hormones that will allow you to respond in the short term. For example, hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are released into your bloodstream, and they increase certain functions while decreasing certain functions. For example, they increase the breakdown of glucose, such can be provided with energy. They increase the the rate at which your heart beats. Generally, they do things that are helpful in the short term, but not in the long term. And this is where anxiety gets really dangerous, by the way. When you have recurrent anxiety, you're triggering your stress response. You're continuously releasing those hormones into your system, and they tend to continuously cause these actions. So while some things are getting ramped up, some things have to go down to balance out the scale so that you can have the maximum amount of energy and focus to escape or survive a stressful situation. I know, right? The brain. Interesting. Anyway, the point is that with this continuous anxiety, it tends to cause damage. Those hormones staying in your system too long might eventually lead to physical damage to your central nervous system. They are not built to be in the body for a prolonged amount of time. That's why anxiety disorders are problematic. Now, to make things clear, it is okay to not be okay. It is okay to not know exactly what's going on. It's okay to be anxious. All of us go through anxiety, and as I have stated earlier, some people are more neurotic than others. What I find is the biggest problem with at least anxiety as compared to anything else is that most people either write it off or claim it too easily. Not to say that you shouldn't speak out about your issues, or not to say that some things don't need to be, some things are really being blown out of proportion. What I am trying to say is that we need to understand ourselves well enough to know exactly what we're going through. Now, to be specific, there are a few anxiety disorders that most people have commonly experienced. For example, separation anxiety disorder, which is just the feeling of anxiety when being separated from a place or person. Now, if you think, just to make this clear, by the way, in child psychology, separation anxiety is experienced by younger children as a normal developmental stage in their life. It's not really a bad thing if your younger sibling just wants to always be around you. That does not mean they have a disorder. It just means that they're developing correctly. It's not weird. It's not wrong. So let's, not label people too heavily for developing normally. What can be said is that this becomes abnormal when it starts disrupting your current state of living and is denoted by symptoms of major anxiety when being separated from the person, continuous excuses to be in the same region as a person or place, deep anxiety which is denoted by the inability or diswant to continuously be separated from something, an inability to focus thanks to being separated from a specific thing. And this has to be going on for a specific set of period of time, by the way. This is how all disorders are measured. It's not just, this has happened once, therefore I should freak out. In adults, about 6 months of this continuously, and in adolescents and children, it should be roughly about 2-ish months. Yeah. So there's a specific time when this can be properly diagnosed, By the way, so all of us get a little separation anxiety from when we care about something or when we need something to be important, but it becomes disruptive when it is completely uprooting our lives, when we work ourselves around the notion of that thing. Honestly, most of the people who experience separation anxiety, and the other disorders I'll get to, we need to have the understanding to see exactly what they're going through. These are real things, and the same way we would address any disease or any disorder that we found in the body, the same way you should address these things. Another very common one is social anxiety disorder. It's the general anxiety of being put in a excessively social situation or a social situation. Now, like I said, some people are slightly more neurotic, so neuroticism can bring itself out in terms of shyness, social anxiety, but doesn't necessarily need to be a problem. It only becomes a problem when someone just can't interact in a social situation. They can't survive, they can't work, they can't do anything when they're brought into a situation which is completely and utterly social. It is evident in the inability to do work in an environment full of people. It is evident in the inability to properly convey or communicate for a prolonged amount of time in a social situation. And the thing is, we tend to have this notion that people who are socially anxious are not normal, are broken, are this, or that. For something to be officially qualified as a disorder, it has to go through a specific amount of time recurrently and officially disturb their life or their means of working or living or processing life. I will re-emphasize this for clarity. Yes, I will re-emphasize this. Some people are more neurotic than others, so they may find it harder to be in social situations because of the worry that it might generate. It is a personality trait. It is absolutely normal, and no one should shame you for it. No one should label you for it as being broken, because it is a psychologically tested personality trait. And yes, the personality model has evolved over time, and it can and will evolve. But as of now, it has been proven that some people are just slightly more neurotic. So I don't see the point in weighing down on others for what they're experiencing. Now, one of the ones which I think I need to mention lastly is generalized anxiety disorder. This is the chronic one, the one which is completely repetitive over a certain number of days, over and over, being completely unable to focus. I'm going to mention this in conjunction with panic disorder, which is another anxiety disorder, because most people experience panic attacks or anxiety attacks and just don't bring it up. It's actually relatively high how many people do have panic attacks. It's generally not as surprising a thing. It only becomes a disorder, panic disorder, when it is repetitive and disruptive. Now, generalized anxiety disorder is a chronic and continuous feeling of anxiety. And like I said earlier on, this kind of thing in the body isn't good. Stress hormones aren't made to stay in your system for a prolonged amount of time. They will cause damage, physical damage, and affect your cognitive function. Yes, they will be that painfully effective in disrupting you. Now that I've covered most of the more scientific terminology around all this, I think I need to speak from my general experience. I tend to be more neurotic than most people. I worry more, I have more attention to detail, and I tend to experience some slightly more negative emotions more often than most people that I've come across. It doesn't mean that I can't function, it doesn't mean that I can't do work, it doesn't mean that I can't be happy, by the way. It also doesn't mean that I am unstable. It just means that my personality, at least to the point it's gotten, has a higher tendency towards neuroticism. And it gets really, tiring to hear the same things. Oh, why don't you just like people? why don't you do this? Or why don't you do this? We're so quick to give solutions, judgments, and labels, but we aren't quick to understand, to care, or to listen. It's very ironic, actually. It's surprisingly ironic, actually. So, I'm going to say it like this. Everyone gets anxious. As I say in almost every one of my videos when I'm bringing out different mental illnesses, everyone gets anxious, everyone goes through certain things. And a tendency towards neuroticism isn't a bad thing. Don't let anyone shame you for feeling a certain way or being a certain way. You are made that way for a reason. Don't let anyone disrupt your self-image by telling you that there's something broken in you when in actuality it's just the kind of person that you are. No one's going to hold you liable, or no one's going to hold it against you, or no one should hold it against you for just being more neurotic. Now, let me also re-emphasize something. Just because I'm saying that neuroticism is a personality trait doesn't mean that we should just let excessive anxiety slide or excessive negative emotions slide. Neuroticism as a personality trait can be a good tell of what might affect somebody in the long run. These continuously anxious experiences and tendencies towards negative emotions can develop into a higher likelihood towards these disorders. For example, people who are neurotic may eventually be more used to routines, or may take up routines more often as a way of keeping organized and avoiding their anxiety. It's just a normal adaptive coping response, right? Now it becomes maladaptive when that becomes obsessive, compulsive focus on a specific thing. It can lead off into that, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I also want us to be aware as a community of people and to understand the people who are around us. If you know someone is slightly more neurotic, it means that they might be going through things at a harder level than maybe you are. It means that they might be slightly more likely to experience these things as a harder blow. It doesn't mean that they're abnormal, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. I will re-emphasize this. All it means is that they will just be experiencing things on a harder level than most people because they tend towards negative emotions. Doesn't mean they can't experience positive emotions, no. As a statement of closing, I would like to say that anxiety as a whole is normal. It's a very normal thing to experience. And we need to be able to normalize the idea of talking about our anxiety, to normalize the idea that some people are slightly more neurotic than others. And we also need to be able to normalize the idea of dealing with disorders like this, of people being open about how this has affected their life. If you're so anxious, you can't move, you can't breathe, you're having a full-blown panic attack almost every other day, you need to be able to come out. And this is a two-way thing. We need to be able to make it comfortable for people to come to us, and they need to be willing to come to us. We need to be better at this, because we've categorized these things in all these neat little boxes of wrong and broken when they are just the general human experience, and sometimes things don't work out in the way we want them to, and it ends up leaking into disorders and problems and the like. It doesn't mean they can't be dealt with, it doesn't mean they can't be helped. And it amuses me that we are so forward thinking in terms of our medical lives when it comes to bodily illnesses. We are so much pushing for a new way to do this and a new way to do this, and we should take this medication, and we should have a whole drawer of medication in our house. Why don't we make it normal to have family talks, counseling sessions, checking up on mental health, actually asking what's going on, if it's going on, what's happening? Why aren't those things normal? Why are those things as normal as having a box of Rufadol in your house? I really don't know, and I really want that to be the case where this is a normal occurrence. Anyway, as time goes on, I will keep bringing up more specific details. I will eventually bring up how anxiety relates to stress, and then I'll move on to other disorders and other things until we start covering things which are a bit heavier. and I hope that the series does help people recognize that they aren't alone in what they're fearing and experiencing. Thank you.